So here we go, learning the runes individually, and got to try and keep this short and sweet. So start with the first one, but I recommend, go through the whole lot in turn and then go through them randomly. So first one, Feihu. Feihu is the cattle. Now, how to interpret that into an answer to a question, or a more modern interpretation, since most of us don't have any dealings with cattle, we consider I always consider the shape of the rune. Let's go with the shape first. So, looking like this, looks kind of like the letter F. It is the letter F, but if you perhaps add more to the other side, it starts to look like a tree or a sheaf of wheat. And that starts to give you an understanding of what I consider the farmer's rune. So it's not just about the cow, the cattle. It's about the whole. It's about growing the grain, feeding the cattle, growing the cattle, nurturing it. And so essentially, Feihu means, if you pick it as an answer through hard work and faith in yourself and perhaps a little bit of luck, all things are possible. So this, as my beginner rune, if you pick this as a single rune for an answer, in later series I'll tell you how to build up to actually reading the runes in a more full way. This would mean that labour brings about a good harvest and abundance, which I've written on it as a more modern interpretation way of divining an answer from the simple word cattle. So that is Feihu. Now the sound of it, Feihu, I consider it, maybe it means for you, or few. Few becomes many, obviously through hard work. So for me, this is very much representative. If you go back, which I thoroughly believe in, go back to understanding what it means to our ancestors, is a way to interpret it to our modern life. So they understood the cycle of hard work, labour, becoming the fruits of your labour, the abundance. And so that is Feihu. So get your notebook out, write down what I've said, and then have a think for yourself, because whose meaning is more important? Not mine. It's yours. So have some confidence and do it your way. I'll see you in the next one. Next up, we have Uruz. Uruz, the traditional or old meaning would be the aurochs, or the wild bull, or bull ox. Wild ox, the bull, that bull energy, that almost out of control bull in a china shop. That is the energy that you think of when you consider a bull. Now, the runes, they represent all kinds of different things to our ancestors, and they saw this symbol and it reminded them of a bull, and I can certainly see why. So, if you excuse my very bad artistic skills, if you add a little head to it, and these are supposed to be muscular forelegs, you can see that bullish stance that we all recognise when we think of it as a bull. So the idea of strength, or being ready to just barge through, to me that is uncontrolled momentum. Okay, you see, when you see bull riders, they're not trying to tame them like they do with horses. It's just see how long you can stay, because it's like an untamable energy. So to interpret that into a more of a modern sense, the answer to a question of, is this going to happen? What can I do to make it happen? I would say, well, there's nothing more you can do, because it's now in the hands of the god. So it kind of represents sort of fate, or uncontrolled momentum. But it certainly represents momentum nonetheless. So if you are in a stuck place in your life and you're feeling like, well, when are things going to start happening, and you pull this out, it's a promise of definite momentum, and really you have no control over it. Sorry about that. So we've looked at the shape and translating the old meaning. So the sound, uruz. Uruz. Like, ooh, I can do it. So I think that first part, that ooh, yeah. I think that's the for me the sound, and it's good to speak them out loud to get that feeling inside. That ooh, rules, I can do it. Yeah, God, I love the runes. So that is Uruz. Like I say, get your notebook out, write down what I've said, You are more than willing to copy my idea here, but if you wanted to buy them from me, it's £20 a set, plus P&P. I wouldn't be copywriting anything because I think it's a pretty great idea. So that is Uruz, number 2 of the first aett, which means set or 8. And on to the next one. Next up, thurisaz. Now, this is been interpreted in many different ways in all the books that I've written, and is often considered quite a negative sign, like representative of chaos. I believe one particular author said thorn, but then I think, well, what has a thorn got to do with our ancestors? But the sound of it, thurisaz, well, you break that down, thur and isa. Isa is much later in the alphabet, but I'll give you a brief explanation. Isa is ice. Thur, Thor, the god Thor, who's one of his great stories, one of the myths, was his battle with the ice giants. So you can consider this simply means battle, or in a modern interpretation, some difficulty. But then look further from that. And as I said in my meditation, when you go to a dark place, push through it. To the outcome, to the next stage. So, you know, Thor goes to war with the ice giants, but what happens? Well, nobody wins. It's a ceasefire and exchange of hostages. So this would, the continued story of thurisaz is that it is a breakthrough, perhaps, a compromise, a ceasefire. And the word I got when I was making this set on top of that was resolution. You know, I can't always fit them in all the way around, you know. So a resolution through compromise and ceasefire, if you like. So that is what the name of it gave me. And honestly, for me, that makes more sense interpreting it as chaos or thorn, because there's more to the story like that, just like there was more to the story of Fehu and Uruz as well. So then look at the shape of it, because we've already done the sound of the name at the back there. The shape of it, don't always just look at them the way they're drawn, turn them around. And for me, when I turn it that way, it looks kind of like a mountain, you know. And as mountaineers will say, things are their very hardest just before you reach the top. And of course, once you reach the top, it's downhill all the way. So if this was to come up in a reading, it would be hugely reassuring that I would pass on to the reader, or feel that myself, I mean the readee even, that even though you are going through or coming up upon a difficult period of your life, a battle perhaps, that it only feels so hard, like you want to give up because you're nearly at the end of the difficult part, and thereafter it gets easier. So yes, that's another little lesson. Turn them around, look at them like that, consider the whole picture, but always go back and consider how our ancestors perceived them. So yes, that's thurisaz, and that is number 3 of the futhark, F-U-T-H. So we've just done. See you on the next one. Next up is number 4, Ansus. Now, first off, the shape of the letter looks more like an F, but if you consider another line on it, it certainly then looks like an A, which is its Germanic letter. So Ansus is considered, and it's important to me, being as I've got it on my third eye, a connection to the ancestors, the sound of it, Ansus, ancestors. And the part of the Norse worldview was their ancestors were the gods, that they were descendants of the gods. So it connects with that god deity energy as well. So, you know, bring that together to a modern interpretation. Well, what do the gods do for us? What do our ancestors do for us? They are mentors. They teach us. So, you know, first off, it's the ancestors. They connect us to deeper parts of ourselves. So a spiritual connection. I've just put connection there. And yes, I do know I spelled ancestors wrong, but I know whoever's going to want to purchase these will forgive that. And then following on from that is, of course, faith. So it's not really enough to just connect with your ancestors. It is also important to trust them to help bring you the answers that you need. And another thing I consider is again, going back to the shape of it. And I sort of figure if you take away that line, it almost looks like an equal sign. So like with an arrow on the end, perhaps the answer is not where you expect it to be. So part of everything we do in our lives is balance, as I say so much with my crib method. You know, the balance is asking for something, help me see with clarity. It's not just going to happen. You know, there has to be a chain reaction, you know, cause and effect. Science, I love science too, science as well. So everything has an equal and opposite reaction. So you have to put in the work, you know, and having faith in the gods and following the signs you get is their hint toward you. I don't know if I've got enough time to pass on the joke of the guy who's drowning and he prays to God for help, and God's like, I sent you a boat and everything. But it works in different ways, you know, and it is important to keep your faith and keep striving forward, you know. So there is perhaps a lot more involved in Ansus than you'd think. Ansus really is the connection, ultimately, the connection between you and the gods, and understanding that not everything happens in the time you want it to. Certain things have to happen to line up to bring you the goal, and that's faith, and patience is part of faith. So that is Ansus, and that's the first 4 of the first et, and there endeth the lesson for Ansus. So next up we have Rado, the next number 5 in the first et. Rado is the letter R. So it's one of the more obvious letter linkages. Now the traditional meaning of this is riding a horse. So when I think about riding a horse, that brings me down to, well, it's control. You're in control. Unlike Urus, which is like the bull energy there, where you don't have control. You do with a horse, if you like. So gentle, controlled momentum, you're in control. Also a very obvious linkage there would be travel or a journey. So then I look at the shape of it, and you know, I'm going a bit out there now with my imagination, but I sort of think about when you're getting ready to take a journey, you know, you take your first step, your foot out, and most especially if it's a journey that takes a bit of courage, hands on hips, chest out, let's do this. You know, so it really does give me that energy with my little stick man there. I know it's not very good, but I never claimed to be a good artist. And then I start thinking, oh, turn it around. Maybe it looks like add a few lines, maybe a person riding a horse. You know, the little face there is the P bit there, or the sticking out bit, and you've got his legs, you know, and that's where 4 legs become 6, you know, and there's power in that. So, you know, it's also the journey becoming more than the destination, you know. So Rado, I feel it's a fairly uncomplicated rune, but to put it into practice, that's what takes courage. Okay, so that is Rado. Next up is number 6, if I got my maths correct, and that is Kenaz or Corno, which relates to the letters C or K. Again, a fairly easy shape to connect to the letter. However, this one is much debated. When I first looked into the runes, when I first started learning the runes, a very good friend of mine dumped a bag in my lap and said, learn them, don't read about them. And my first thought was, it's a book shape, you know, it's very obvious. And again, my artistic skills aren't great, but they're, you know, it's a book, an open book. But you don't just get your learning from reading, you know, it's much more than that. So another thought for Corno or Kenaz, which are the 2 different names for it, is a light, a beacon, a fire. And I can sort of see where they got that from. Because going back, you know, a fire is enlightening. So enlightenment becomes knowledge, you know. So I can see where they got there, but I'm all about going back to come forward. So going back to the original meaning of a book, then brings in the sound ken as, and that comes from a very old English word, still used in Scotland and the very northern parts of England. Do you ken what I'm saying? Ken is to know. Do you know? And it's, you know, knowing is far more than learning. It's like intuition. So we have there knowing, intuition and learning, you know, all those things combined, and to bring us kenas or corno, which is a light and inspiration. Easier said than done, of course. But yes, this is knowledge, or a gaining of knowledge, or a trusting of your intuition, to ken, to just know. Now, the other one I thought of is mathematically, it looks a lot like the greater than sign. So the very basic understanding of life is to increase. And of course, that's what knowledge is about. It's increasing. So, you know, today is less than tomorrow. And that helps us learn a deeper lesson of don't try and do it all at once. I've always said, keep it simple, stupid. And so take it in steps. Don't try and rush it. You will learn more tomorrow than you did today. And that increases to the day we die. And we move on to the next life. Speaking of which, on to the next one. See you in a bit. So next up, number 7 in the first et or set. And here we have a gebo or gibo, depending on how you want to pronounce it, in the letter G. Not so easy to interpret from the shape to the letter. The letter obviously relates more to the word gebo. So this one is one that was one of the ones that I struggled to connect with, because it's like its original meaning is gift. So a very obvious answer with this, picking it out as a rune, is, oh, you're going to get a gift. But, you know, gifts are far more than that. It was only through life experience I started to understand, and I really truly connected with this back in 2021, when a very hard lesson was taught to me in giving too much and not being smart, seeing the red flags. So this is about the balance of giving. So if you've asked a question about perhaps a friend or a family member, are they doing me wrong? Then this is a very obvious one. It's imbalanced, you know. So this is also, I feel, in regards to recommending you separate an energy connection, which does bring me on to the shape, but I'll finish this off first. Other things are, you know, a contract, like a long-term connection, long-term contract, and most especially the lesson is valuing yourself, valuing your time. Now, part of giving is to be open to receive, which is very difficult for very natural givers, but it is what keeps it in balance. You can't keep giving, or you'll have nothing left. And the other side to it, an additional part that I learned recently, is about retaining. You might have that knowledge, that advice, but if there's a certain person that keeps coming back and coming back and coming back, at some point they have to learn for themselves. So to retain your knowledge is also important for other people, and it gives them the gift of learning or experience. So onto the shape. So as I said, the shape of it, the X, you separate it into 2 and it becomes double corno. So it is very much connected with learning and that separation of energy with people. And then, as I said, like a contract, you know, seeing X next to where you're supposed to sign. So it relates to that. And then the wrapped present with this sort of X on top. So this all adds to the complexity of Gebo, which on the surface, when you first start out, is almost too easy. And speaking of which, the next one coming up is even more layered and perhaps even more easy on the surface. Oh, we're not there yet. Right, in a mo. So next up, you had a sneak preview there, is Wunjo. Wunjo is joy. And joy is another thing that is, you know, you pick it out and, oh, joy. Okay, that's a good thing, right? Name of it is Wunjo, which is the W or V, which again is not so easy to interpret from the shape, but more from the name of it. So, you know, joy, much like happiness, is not something that it just happens, you know. It has to be made to happen, and it's also very fleeting, you know. The joy, 1 minute your team scores, woohoo, then suddenly the next team scores. That's a very simple analogy of how fleeting joy can be. You know, so how do we find our joy in the darkness? Well, that comes with splitting up the name of it. Wun, the Jo is joy. Wun, what could that relate to? And it came to me, Wun, wonder, investing in your curiosity and your wonder, you know, rainbow or a beautiful sunrise, that brings joy, you know. You can't see a rainbow or a sunrise if you don't go out. So it's also about experiencing life, you know, going out and exploring and investing in your wonder and your curiosity brings about a much more lasting joy, you know, a great memory to add to your meditation, you know, as in my previous series. So on the surface, it's far too easy to just go joy, you know, oh, that's the answer. But there has to be a journey to reach that answer, you know. So, you know, if it's a question of something, a concern about children, then it's like, yes, they will find joy. But it could be a hard road to get there, you know. When I get on to how to read the runes and understand how important it is to use multiple runes, not just one for an answer. Now, looking at the shape of it, and this one is even worse, you know, drawing wise, you know. I had the idea, if you look here, of a sort of salute to life, thank you very much. But also, you know, you're looking out across to the horizon, what's on the other side. That's the start of your journey into curiosity. But then also I sort of thought it looked almost like a kissy face, you know what I mean, blowing kisses to the world. So it's also about appreciating that joy and valuing it, you know. So speaking of kisses, I'll see you on the next one. And there endeth the first et. And we'll do a brief video to go over the et, that first et as a whole. And then we'll move on to the second. So see you on the next one. So just a brief run through of the first et, and I'm going to try and obviously keep this short, include in it a very interesting esoteric connection that was first brought up from my knowledge in Freya Aswyn's book, Northern Mysteries and Magic, which I have permission from her, as she is a good friend, to share that with you. And I would certainly recommend it, not because she's a good friend of mine, but because it actually really opened my eyes up to the fuller extent of how the runes interact with mankind. So to briefly go through it and attach to it that esoteric point of view, we look at the Norse creation myth, excuse me, trying to find my words today. So starting with Fehu and the arising of Udumla, with the crashing of the realms of ice and fire, Fehu being cattle or the cow, and of course abundance, harvest, labour, the great labour it would take to create the world. Uruz, the strength and the uncontrolled momentum, but it also relates to that cow energy. Ordumna then starting to lick at the salt, which gave rise to the first of the giants, the ice giants. So Thurisaz, Thor versus the ice giants, the giant Ymir. Thurisaz being the breakthrough needed to start that big bang that the scientists talk about. Then we move on to the creation of the first of the gods, Ansus. And yes, it was quite a violent world back there. They destroyed and killed Ymir and started the controlled, sorry, I can't hold on to them with my hands, I'll pop them down there, the controlled momentum of Rado, the journey to creation. And next up becomes quite the rush of life. Emir's body being used to create the heaven and the earth, the mountains, the seas, etc., etc. And Kenaz to Ken, the knowledge that what they were doing was creating this wonderful thing that we call Earth, and the Norse call Midgard. Also the cornote or Kenaz represents the light, so as in with the Christian myth, the sun and the moon and the rhythms and the tides. And of course next up was the creation of mankind, the beings to look after this great world, Gebo, the gift of life, and the balance of that life that we brought, us humans brought to the world. And then finally, of course, the joy of what they created, the wonder. And as I said, to find joy is to experience life. So I think that's an interesting way to put together the synopsis of that. And I've decided, a long time ago, I wrote a little guided meditation on that particular, on the first et and the idea of the creation myth. So I'm going to add this at the end of this series, but that will have to be broken up into pieces and popped on YouTube for the full meditation. So yes, so that's the little synopsis of the first et. Next up, the second et, destruction, aka doing what is necessary. The first et, of course, being about creation. So thanks for joining me again. See you soon.